Cool. Welcome to my talk, The Bare Minimum, Accessibility in Web. And it's basically about the journey to fix 96.8% of our websites. So a little bit about myself. I'm a front-end lead engineer and technical co-founder at the Career OS. I was born in Romania, but now I live in beautiful sunny Barcelona. I like to write tech articles about security, testing, and obviously accessibility. So you can follow me on Twitter to read more of or browse my content. Professionally, I've worked on all three big frameworks. I started with Angular 1, Angular 2, Vue, and now I'm working fully with React. A little bit about my company. So every day you hear about another company doing layoffs or stuff like that. So what we're doing is we provide a platform where you can actually go out and network with people so they can actually recommend you for a job. Because if you just go to LinkedIn and click apply, the odds of them getting it back, it's very little. But if you actually reach out to someone from your old school or from someone we recommend to you to reach out, then you have better odds to get to that first interview. So yeah, if you want to scan the QR code to read more about the company. Now, I moved from Romania to Barcelona during the pandemic. And I absolutely love my decision. Barcelona is the perfect city. It has the beach. It actually has very beautiful mountains that are close by. It has the best football team in the world, which is Espanyol Barcelona, not FC Barcelona, like some people think. And unfortunately, they're in the second division this year, but we're going to go back to first. But as the pandemic was slowly ending in 2021, I started noticing something really weird in Barcelona. So I started seeing a lot of people in wheelchairs or moto chairs around the city. They were going to the gym, in bakeries, in every supermarket, actually at Espanyol matches. They were absolutely everywhere. And for me, coming from Eastern Europe, a former communist country, this was super weird to see at first, and I admit this was my mistake. I thought, wow, there are so many people with disabilities in Spain. While in Romania, you couldn't see anybody like this, more or less. So that was my first thought. But then I started realizing that there are not more people with disabilities. You just see them because the city is accessible, and they go out and have fun, and the city provides, and the state provides that to them. While in Romania, usually we have something like this. So you can see we are basically accessible, but technically accessible, but practically they cannot do much of anything. So you have ramps that are closed, you have an accessibility elevator that has a bump there that they cannot use it, then you have a sidewalk to cross. You have to pass, that yellow thing is where you actually wait for the tram. So people are going to be there waiting for a tram, but an accessible wheelchair cannot pass through. So a big part of our day-to-day life is not just the city we live in, but actually the internet. We use the internet every day, and part of my talk is how and why we can make the internet more accessible for everyone. So let's start with the modern workflow of a web application. So normally, this is how it goes, right? You have, let's say you work at a big company. You usually, when you want to build a new feature, it goes through these steps. So you have UX research, and that maybe do some benchmarking. They get some insights. Then they give that insights to a PM or a PO, who basically writes a document about why we should build this, what results are we going to have. Then this document is taken over by the development team, who usually create stories, tasks. They discuss it in a team. It gets split and worked on by developers. Then it goes into QA. They test it. It's pushed into production. maybe they are gonna A/B test the feature, see if it's working, have some data analysts working on it to see the impact that it had, and then we look at the results and everybody is happy, more or less, or not. So one thing I didn't mention in all of this process, and you might not have heard it, is accessibility. So there was no point in this entire process where accessibility was discussed. So let's look at an actual example. So let's say we work at a big e-commerce website, we're selling shoes, and during user testing and customer feedback, we found out that our e-commerce website really needs like a favorite button. We don't have that, and we constantly get feedback that our user would like to save a product for later, to purchase later. Now, UX design quickly implements a prototype. They do some usability testing. Everybody loves it. The PO then takes that, the usability testing. They write a product requirements document, a PRD or a PID, depending on the company you're working at, which is 5 or 6 pages about what user base we are targeting, what design we have chosen, what the impact we think we're going to be, and basically what analytics events we're going to have and stuff like that. The dev tech that takes this document, creates stories, like I said, they break it into smaller tasks, estimate, and then it goes into production. So we have something like this. And what you can have in reality is a very visible heart icon that has been added. I don't know if you even can see the difference between before and now. So we have an extra heart icon that the users can do. But this is very visible. It has no label or role, and it has no description, obviously. And if you actually click, right-click and go into Inspect Element, and you inspect it, it's not actually a button, but a div, which has event handlers on it. So this is, if you're lucky, the developer that implemented this might have known a little bit more about accessibility, but in this case, they didn't. So why? And one thing is that POs and PMs usually focus on feature results, and devs focus on delivering their results, and maybe they're focused on SEO and Core Web Vitals, but unfortunately accessibility is the odd man out. And this actually is a huge problem, because what product doesn't realize is by ignoring accessibility, they are missing on a huge part of the user base. So the World Health Organization have said that 1 in 6 people suffer from a disability. And if you count that on the number of people that we have, that means that 1.6 billion people with a B actually can be affected by your website's lack of accessibility. Now, there are multiple types of disabilities, and usually they are grouped in these 4. So you have either people with motor disability who are using voice recognition, adaptive keyboards, mouse sticks, eye tracking software. Then we have people with visual disabilities who use screen readers or Braille software. Then people with auditory disabilities who are using hearing aids, they converse using sign language, or they're actually reading transcripts. And then people with cognitive disabilities who use communication tools. And we need to make sure that all of them, regardless of type of disability, can browse our products and buy our products and see our products as easily and smoothly as possible. Because statistically, 16% is a game changer, right? When we build software, we think about success in like 0.1% more sales. But imagine what we can do with 16%. So here are some of the common accessibility issues that we encounter. So for the past 4 years, the WebAIM Million project, it's a project that runs accessibility tests on the top 1 million websites in the world. So they just look at homepages, and they take these 1 million websites from different lists, and websites without homepages or pages that return 404 or pages that have fewer than 10 HTML elements are totally ignored. So they're just looking at big overall websites. And the results of this project is that 96.8% of homepages have very big accessibility issues. And this actually is an improvement, 96.8, because in 2019 we were at 97.8. So we went from 97.8 in 2019 to 97.4. You can see this graph over here. You can't even see the dip or how we improve. That's where we're going. So we're very close to 100% of our websites are having accessibility issues. But the good part is that all of the errors, the accessibility errors, are actually in 6 groups. So these are all the errors that we're having. We either have low contrast text, we have missing alt text, empty links, missing form labels, empty buttons, or missing document language. These are most of the errors that we are encountering. So let's go through each and one and see what the problem is, how we can improve it, and so forth. So now the first principle of accessibility usually says that every text needs to be perceivable. So we have to make sure that everybody can read the text on our website. That means people who suffer from color blindness or people with low vision, they can also read our text. So this problem, the low contrast text, is actually found in 84% of the 1 million websites they have run their survey on. So let's look at an example in practice. So here we have 2 colors, the very green one and very blue one. And just by looking at them, you can tell that they're both very bright. So if you write a color that's green on a background that's blue, obviously it won't be perceivable. So here is how it looks if you put it together. I don't think nobody can read that. So there's a formula you can use for calculating contrast ratio. So this is they do a report. So it says here that you have different accessibility ratios that it's going to fail. And it's going to look if you have a normal text and if you have a large text, and what happens if you're using this text in an input or so forth. So this formula, it's called the WCAG2 formula. And actually, it's pretty simple what they do to calculate it. They just have a rating for each color, and they do the division. And if it's closer to 1, that means that it's not actually readable, so you need a high score. But this doesn't actually reflect how people see, right? Especially when backgrounds are darker than text. Now, WCAG has a new formula out, which is the 3rd version, and this actually improves how they actually perceive the color. So basically, it's something like this. So the WCAG2 guidelines are in 3 levels, which is you have A, AA, and AAA. And it's very important to not look just at the text, but also if you are using icons and stuff like that to figure it out. So fortunately, there's a Figma plugin or other plugins for your design tools. So when you're designing, you can actually see if what your colors are choosing or whatever you're using on is actually accessible or not. So for best practices, for short text, you need like a 4.5 to 1 ratio to meet the guidelines. But for bigger text, a ratio of 3 to 1 is actually pretty fine. So you can use plugins for Figma or Sketch to catch the low ratio. And for developers, you can actually implement this in Lighthouse tools or CI/CD practices. There's actually a lot of visual testing software out there that takes a screenshot of your desktop, and then it compares and it can give you the result if you are, have correct low contrast or not. Now, everybody actually loves a good image or a meme, right? So it can turn mediocre piece of content to something really great and funny. So imagine the amount of time and skill you spent crafting that perfect joke and putting it on your website or somewhere on your blog, and it's not actual readable by screen readers, because screen readers cannot interpret images without alt text. So this leaves visually impaired users with no way to understand the content of the image. Alt text is actually read aloud by screen readers, and without it, they can miss important information. Now, luckily, this is very, very easily to automate. So if you have a lint rule or ESLint rule, it can catch images with empty alt tags. But then the question becomes, should all images have alt text? And the answer is no. If you have decorative images or images that don't have any meaning, they are there just for background, you shouldn't put alt images for them, because then they're just going to overload screen readers. So what you can do is just have the image, and you can say its role is presentational, and screen readers will just ignore it. So for best practices, add alt text to all non-decorative images. Keep it short and descriptive, basically like a tweet. You don't want the screen reader to have to go through entire propositions. Don't include text like image of or photo of, because then it's not going to convey the same meaning. And of course, leave the alt text blank if the image is purely decorative, and it's not necessary to add text in the title field. Now, speaking about screen readers, the number one problem they encounter is empty links. And when I mean empty links, I mean something like we have there. We have an A tag, it has an href property, it has nothing there, and inside it just has some spans that are usually icons, right? Imagine we have a search icon on top of on top of our nav bar. It's just one button, and we don't have any text there, and screen readers don't know what to do with this. So when you have code like this, it's impossible for screen readers to determine the actual link. So the best practice in this case is to add not just to add both role and screen reader. So for example, we have the home there. That's in the second image to the right. We have the home that has a class that is SR only. So this is visible just for screen readers. We hide that with CSS, with visibility, and for our actual website, they can see only the icon as we intended. It's not good to have zero text inside the A links like we have there for Instagram, because screen readers cannot read it, and they cannot understand where is this link going to take me? The screen reader is just going to say link. Should you click it? Should you not? You don't know. So we can take advantage of the area label there that says go to Facebook page at the top. This is going to be clear for screen readers. And to automate this, we can integrate Lighthouse in the pipeline that can catch empty links. And again, an ESLint would also help for this. It's also very good to use framework-specific links. So if you're using Next, or something like this, they have an official link or nav link property, and use it instead of using anchor links, because they already take care of these accessibility problems for you behind the scenes. So now I want you to imagine a popular, like we go back to our e-commerce example. So we go to this website, we're a user, we go through the products, we find the products that we like, we click it, we add it to the cart, and finally we reach the checkout, right? When is the time to enter our details and pay for the product, we find this. This is a form that we see. it's not very easy, or actually it's impossible to figure out what input each input is. You just have 20 empty inputs. So this is what actually screen readers are seeing when, or are reading when you don't properly, correctly implement accessible forms. So the biggest problem is because we're missing input labels. So this is a correct form. We have a label. We say that it's for name. We have the input, which is name. We can also add area described by. And this, it's actually a really good helper to say what the input is expecting. Okay, because for us who don't suffer from visibility issues, we might have other information, like it gets red if it's invalid. As soon as the input is valid, it goes green. But someone who suffers from visual impairment cannot have this. So it's better to have a hint that says, please enter 6 characters, or please enter a correct format for email. So some best practices for text boxes and drop-downs. The label should immediately precede the input field, so it's very easy to go through the screen reader. For checkboxes and radio buttons, the label should be afterwards, so this is a good practice. And as a last result, you can use area label if you don't want to add actual labels. You can use area labels inside the input. So let's talk about buttons. Buttons must have a programmatic name, so people that use assertive technologies can gather information about how to activate or track or see the status of the button. So if there's no text describing the functionality of the button, screen readers will not know what the button does. So if you have a simple button that has a V on click, similar to links, inside you have an icon, screen readers would not know what this button does, basically. It just says that it has a E tag inside of it. So this is the most common situation. And just like links, if you have an on click on it, make sure to add or enter also on enter pressed, on key press. Not everybody is using a mouse, so the on click will not trigger for every tool that the users are using. So obviously the biggest mistake would be to use a div and then style it as a button without adding a role that is a button. Because usually screen readers are pretty smart on figuring out what the links are, the buttons are. So if you just use divs for everything, you're just going to overwhelm them. So speaking of interacting with buttons, a good practice is to avoid the CSS outline 0. A lot of screen readers and accessibility technology are obviously using the outline to navigate across our websites. And keyboard accessibility is super essential for people who do not use a normal computer mouse. So avoid overwriting the default behavior of browsers. Design accessible focus and hover states. So when we navigate the website, we can see what is now in focus. So do not hijack the scroll behavior. This is actually a really big if for people. Because if you hijack the scroll behavior, people who use keyboards are going to have a problem interacting with the website. And it's very important to keep the order of the navigation. So the order of the HTML elements in the page needs to follow the flow of the page. So I know we can use Flexbox now and Grid, and we can have one element at the top and then one element at the bottom, and then visually we can show them in which way we want using Flexbox. But for screen readers, they need to be in order because they go through each HTML element one by one. Also, it will be really good to have like a skip to content link. For example, if you have a really big menu that usually all e-commerce websites have, where they have categories and all sorts of that. If you're using a screen reader, they have to go through each link, so they click tab, 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 tab before they reach the content. So it's very important to have a skip to content link at the beginning of menus, so they can usually bypass all that information. It would be really good to actually test your website using a keyboard. So what you can do, you can create Cypress end-to-end tests that simulate keyboard behavior, because I know for us it's going to be really hard to do end-to-end manual testing using just the keyboard. We're used to using the trackpad or the mouse. But you can write end-to-end tests that simulate the user keyboard-only behavior. There's a library called Cypress Real Events, and you can give it tabs, click arrows, and stuff like that. So it's really good if you can implement, like for example, going from the home page to the checkout page completed, your most important flow in your application using just end-to-end test. Now, to correctly navigate the content of our application, we must make sure we don't have any heading issues. So, firstly for accessibility, but also for SEO. So headings should be in the correct order. You should have H1 first, then you have H2, and then you should have H3, right? Your page shouldn't start with an H2 or an H3. So we want to have something like this. We have the main heading, which is the most important heading in our application. It should say the most important thing, what our app or website is doing. Then we can have H2 and H3, which is a group, and then another H2, and stuff like this. It should have a clear hierarchical order. So, of course, use descriptive headings, don't skip them, so don't go from H2 to H4, and use semantical HTML. Don't have divs and just style them as headings. Now, the last important accessibility is the document language. So tools that we use every day have gotten really smart, and they can actually read the document that we have, and just by setting the language, they can translate it automatically. I don't know if you saw, but Google has this option where it automatically translates your website in the language that they want. So if you don't set a document language, it won't know that your text is in English, so it won't offer to translate it for you. And a lot of people are using tools that are like Braille keyboards or refreshable Braille displays. They need this document language to know and go through your content. So one more thing is, I think I said about area attributes for a while, but no area is better actually than bad area. So we've seen before that you can add area label or area described by or area labeled by to different elements, and they're going to explain what the element is doing to the screen reader. But if you're going to skip area entirely, Chrome or Firefox is actually pretty smart on figuring out what that button is doing, and it's going to infer an area for you. So by adding an empty area label, you're actually doing harm because you're overriding what the browser thinks that input should have. So another clear thing is like you have the role object, and you can create all sorts of things and then simulate the role it should have. So for example, if you have a table and you set it a role of something else, like a log or a button, by mistake, the software that they are using is not going to identify that as a real table, and it cannot read the content. So before creating components or whatever you want to do, like you want to build an alert or a button or a dialogue or a tooltip, there's actually a really good website called Patterns. You have the link here that has the correct accessibility, how to implement it correctly. So it will have examples, it will have everything that you need to correctly implement that component. So, usually when people ask about accessibility, the biggest question is, what should I use? Pixels, should I use RAM, should I use EM? What should I use in my CSS so it's accessible to everybody? So now, the official guideline is that for a website to be accessible, it should be usable if you zoom in 200%. So that should be the default law. So, and here is where we hit our first accessibility snag. Because when we use pixel value for font size on the page, it will no longer be affected by users' chosen default screen size. So my mother-in-law, for example, has problems with reading visibility. So on her phone, she has a default setting at the font size is at 300% of normal font size, Apple's font size. So when she goes to website, everything is zoomed in by default. But if you're hard coding pixels values for them, this would be, she could no longer see that. It will not be affected. She has to zoom in manually. So it's very, very important to use a relative unit like REM for typography. Now, one of the big no-no of web development is setting in the root element, HTML or body, to set the font size using pixels. Because if you do this, and if you zoom in, zoom out, the default font size of the operating system will no longer work. So we should let the default size be inherited from the device and then manipulate the data using RAM units like we have there for small and large. Now, the most effective method for developers to actually enforce accessibility tools is to have a strong linter. So you can have, this is a project on GitHub that you can install in your application, and it's gonna set some really big accessibility rules so you know what you're building. So some of the rules are they're gonna enforce that all area props are valid, that all elements with area roles must have a correct role. It enforces that HTML has a lang prop. It enforces your audio and video elements to have a track for captions and that sort of thing. So now that we know what the biggest problems are, we need to plan on how we can actually save the web. So first thing we have to do is integrate accessibility in the workflow of a feature process. So we need to involve in the UX research people with disabilities. We need to add accessibility success criteria in our documents, accessibility scores in our definitions of done, accessibility tests in our CI/CD pipeline. I know it's a lot that we have to do, but we were trying to make the world accessible. So coming back to our example, that we wanted to build a basic icon that user can favorite their products. What we do is UX uses a Figma contrast checker plugin to design the button. The prototype is validated with visually impaired users. We have accessibility scores in our documentation and as a metric for success. And of course, the development team needs to use the latest ESLint plugins. We need to test it using screen readers, and we can use Lighthouse accessibility scores before we push it to production. So a fun fact, if a website is actually founded by the European Union, it needs to pass an accessibility score by law. And this would be super important if all websites need to be accessible by law, but we are not there yet. but hopefully we can get it there in the future. So here are some tools to use. You can take a picture. I'll share the links. I'll share the slides later. But it's basically a set of tools that you can simulate what the accessibility readers are actually seeing when they browse your website. So they can simulate, for example, color blindness, dyslexia, and all sorts of things. So yeah, my name is Dan, and thank you for coming. Do you have any questions? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you have a radio, actually how we see it in reality, you know, we have the radio on the left, the circle, and the label is on the right. But if you have it before it, the HTML, you might have the label first, and then you style it to be like this. But it should have the correct order.
I guess I was thinking about the label for.
Yeah, yeah. In the HTML structure, so it's always in the correct order we see it, it should be in the HTML as well. Thank you. Cool. Have a rest of the afternoon. Have a nice rest of the afternoon.